All right, welcome, Rev Erika Allison. So happy to have you on Queerly Beloved. How are you?
I'm so great, and I just love Queerly Beloved. That's such a beautiful title.
Thank you
I
so much.
actually am wearing my beloved shirt for anybody who's watching and not just listening. I'm wearing a beloved shirt in honor of Queerly Beloved.
I didn't even catch that until this moment. I love that. And it's funny, I had my logo for the show designed by someone on Fiverr. I think it was a person in India who ended up creating it for me.
Yep.
And they purposely have the B a different color than the loved. And I didn't ask them to do that. And I don't know if they were sort of creating it with that in mind, as your shirt also
Yeah,
has the
same
B
way.
loved. But it wasn't how I originally envisioned it, that it would be in that font. And they did that, and I was like, okay, that works. And so yeah, Queerly Beloved has that also that invitation to be loved. Yeah.
Yeah, beloved and be loved. It's so good.
Exactly. Well, it's wonderful to connect with you again. I always love sharing space with you and being in your energy. And I like to start these podcast interviews with the question of who are you in this moment? But tell me by just dropping in, maybe taking a couple breaths and noticing who you are in this moment, on this day, in this life. But tell me by describing the perfect drag avatar that would embody that.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So, yes, I just dropped in. Thank you for the intentionality of that question and the acknowledgement that we change so often because I think I'm not the same person I was yesterday as today.
Mm.
Today, I'm feeling just like I'm feeling the awakened being. So, if I were a drag avatar embodying awakened being, I don't know. Maybe I'd be in some like really cool drag king pajamas and I'd just be like waking up, like just this sense of waking up, like messy bedhead and like just but yet the pajamas are like they're snazzy, like it's got to have those snazzy, almost like I'm imagining like if Elvis was wearing pajamas, what pajamas would Elvis be wearing?
Yes, I'm seeing silk, some kind of like silky.
Definitely. Gotta
Yeah,
be. Gotta be some satin something, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Amazing. Thank you. I love that. Thank you for showing up in this awakened state. I love that. And I am in a state of grace, is what I'm present to. So my drag avatar would be a embodiment of grace, and I'm seeing some kind of beautiful silk gown. I also see like silk as a beautiful fabric of flow. And maybe she has this like cascading blonde hair with her beautiful light blue satin gown as she sort of like floats and gracefully moves amongst the clouds, is what I'm seeing.
Beautiful. All right. I think our avatars could have a good time together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting to be present to grace right now because I woke up this morning in a state of anxiety and stress. And I noticed that when I have those moments of anxiety and stress, that when I'm able to find my grace in spite of that or in the face of that, that I'm more present to that grace in a different way, in a more pronounced way, sort of like how it feels to go from being sick to healthy. And when you're
Mhm.
healthy, you're suddenly like, oh God, health, and you're more
Right.
present to it. I'm kind of in that state of presence to it right now.
And the gratitude of like, oh yeah, I'm not, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's like I do have this. I do have this. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Well, I'm so excited to talk about your book, which for folks watching the YouTube, I'm holding right now, Gay the Pray Away. It's a beautiful book cover. And also about some of your new initiatives, your new projects. But we'll start with the book. And I'd love to, just to get us started, hear the origin story of the book. What inspired you to write this?
Yeah, definitely. And just to make sure everybody got the title, it's so, pray the gay away is typically the slang term given to conversion therapy, right? Like change attempts to try to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. And so the book is really a tongue-in-cheek twist on that. It's not pray the gay away, it's let's gay the pray away.
Mhm.
And the book really, it does tell my story of being a conversion therapy survivor. And so the origin story of how it came about was I grew up in Texas and went through conversion therapy when I was 18. And for a lot of my life post that, I'm 40, almost 42 at this point. For a majority of my adult life, I really just, I kind of repressed that memory. I really kind of tucked that in. It was some baggage I was carrying around. I didn't talk about it much, didn't process it. I really was taking the approach of, okay, well, if it didn't work on me, it didn't change me, it must not have harmed me either.
Mm.
And as I was getting older, getting into my 40s, I had some visions of like what I thought my life was going to look like when I hit that point. And I felt like I was really just not thriving in the way that I always imagined I would. And it prompted me to do some really deep work, to really do some exploring about like what's going on here. Why am I not happy? Why am I not thriving? And as I was doing that deep work, one of the awarenesses I had was that this experience was traumatic in many ways, and I wasn't giving myself the space to treat it that way and heal from it. And so if you extrapolate that, my experience was conversion therapy, but I put that under this category of terms I call identity harm. And
Hmm.
identity harm, it happens to all of us, whether or not you've been through, quote, formal conversion therapy. It's this idea that sometime in your life you get messages from the outside world that say who you are is not okay, or there's something wrong with you, or it's not good enough. We've all had that. And the extent to which, sometimes those don't hurt us. They just go right past us. No big deal. But there's sometimes we take them in and they somehow get stuck in there and become part of our identity.
Mm.
And that's what I call identity harm. So I actually realized as part of my journey that I was holding on to some beliefs back from when I was, told that I was not okay and God couldn't love me for who I was and all of these things. I kept some of those messages as part of my identity, and I was going through life
Mm.
essentially not loving myself, feeling like I had to prove myself all the time, feeling like I had to twist myself in a pretzel so other people could love me. And
Mm.
that was causing me to have failed relationships and failed careers and just general dissatisfaction. And so basically all of that journey led me to this place of reckoning with this identity harm, and getting some healing and some help that I needed from it, and really realizing that there are longer term effects if we don't look into what have we picked up along the way that's causing us to believe things about ourselves and about our identity. So
Mm.
because of the healing I found, I really wanted to share this story back with the world and just help other people if anyone else is struggling or maybe not finding the thriving that they're looking for in life too. Could this be something to explore if they haven't explored it?
Mm. So good. Yeah, and I think it's such an important thing to bring attention to, this identity harm piece, especially for queer folks. But really, it's likely to be an occurrence for most people in the world, that at some point or another we've been told that who we are is not right or not acceptable or not worthy of love. But certainly for queer people, and I love in the book you ask this question of, how are the past harms of your life still affecting you today? And to create that invitation for folks to look inside and ask that question. I think that too many of us move through this life without questioning if we're doing it in the most optimal, thriving way. And unless there's some kind of crisis or some kind of burning fire, we don't address some of these things that are holding us back. And so to create space for that question, even if our life is going okay, to still ask ourselves, how are the past harms of our lives affecting us today, could be the first step to unlocking our level up, to unlocking like our highest potential.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I found. It's one of those questions where it can be scary to look at
Yeah.
because, there may be implications about life that you don't want to face right now. But
Mhm.
it can also be liberating. Like anything that's challenging, it can be the thing of freedom. And I found that for me, that when I really looked at that question and got honest with myself about how I was being affected, I was able to see patterns in my relationships that I
Mm.
could trace back to messages I picked up along the way that were informing to this day how I was behaving. And
Mm.
so I would encourage, I love that. I love the invitation to pause and ask that question and see just what opens up for you.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting in my field, as a coach, and I know you coach as well, to to sometimes come in contact with people who will say like, I can't go there. That's too, it's going to be too challenging. It's too hard. And to having gone there and also witnessed, observed, and supported other people in going there, to know how much freedom and joy and livelihood is on the other side of it, it's always sort of jostling to me to have someone resist in that way and say, you know what, no, I don't want to go there. And it's like, but can't you see that you can create so much if you do? And of course, some people need time and space, and they need to be ready to go there. I just, my heart breaks for those who choose to never address some of these old wounds and live their lives held back from them.
Yeah, I get that. My take on it is that if it's coming up for you now, like if you happen to be listening to this, it may be a sign that you are ready, and that's why it's in your world. I know for me, there was a 15-year period of time when it just wasn't even on my radar.
Sure.
Nothing was prompting me to look at it. I was just unconsciously going through my patterns, suffering, not knowing why. And it really wasn't until I was ready that things started popping and resources started coming into my life, and challenges were getting a little more frictiony, and I needed to do something about it. So it may be that the timing isn't right, but I'm with you that going through the challenge, coming out the other end is like, I wouldn't change it for the world. I wish I had done it earlier, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with that in mind, something you touch on is this idea of trauma, because I think that there's so many folks who will sometimes downplay what they did go through as, oh, well, it wasn't really trauma. It wasn't really that big of a deal. And not actually give the merit and value and weight of impact that some of these past events have had on them. And so can you just share a little bit about how you like to define trauma or talk about trauma that might support folks to recognize that, yeah, some of their past maybe did actually have an impact?
Yeah, totally. And of course, like just prefacing that I'm not a trauma expert, other than I'm a lived experience person, as we all are, I believe. But yes, for me, what I experienced was, for a lot of my life, I thought trauma, I had a definition in my head of what it was. And we've all heard these stories of horrific things that happen to people. And so it was very easy for me to rationalize my experience and basically say, well, it wasn't like that. I mean, I had a good family. I had loving parents. I wasn't abandoned, like all of these things, which subtly kind of it blocked my ability to fully feel the feelings and then heal them. It almost like I would talk myself out of the healing process, because I wouldn't allow myself to even go into the healing process, because I convinced myself there was nothing to heal.
Yes.
And so I think there's this fine line there. Like, I knew I didn't want to be stuck in a complete victim consciousness where I was blaming and, just really stuck in kind of this perspective of, I can't go anywhere from here. I knew I didn't want that, but I also knew that going the other side of the spectrum, almost like bypassing what happened to me, wasn't helping me either. I had the lived experience of this. All it was doing was keeping me stuck, because I never allowed myself the grace, speaking of your drag character, the grace to kind of take care, be compassionate with myself for what I went through, and be with myself and walk myself through the healing of that process. And so finding that middle ground between, we don't need to be like I didn't want to be stuck in my trauma. I didn't want to be so identified by it that I couldn't disidentify with it. And yet I also didn't want to go so far as to ignore it or pretend it didn't happen. I found this middle ground, and it really helped to not do, you hear people say trauma comparing.
Yeah.
It's not super helpful to trauma compare, because it's very easy to say, well, somebody's had it worse than me, which is true. Somebody's had it worse than you. And you've also had hard things, and your hard thing to somebody else might be easy, and to somebody else, their hard thing might be easy to you. So it really does us no good to compare. You just have to be with yourself where you are, and know that if something really did hurt you, that you deserve compassion for that. And you are the best person to give that to yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah. What comes up for me when you share that is this declaration that we are all worthy of healing.
Mm,
that you are all worthy of healing,
mm,
and that it isn't about having to have the most trauma in order to deserve the rite of passage to healing. And it isn't about having to be this remarkable person of service who deserves healing. Like, we are just worthy of healing. And in many ways, from my perspective, that's what we're here on the planet to do. That's
mm.
part of why our souls have chosen to come into these bodies at this time on this planet, is to heal the parts of ourselves that are still not healed. So our soul consciousness chooses this body and this set of circumstances with the intention of evolution, of soul evolution. And that evolution, a significant part of that evolution, is the healing that
Yes.
happens, that transpires, the opportunity of healing that we get to do, in these bodies that we're walking through the world in.
I love that. And that's actually helped me make sense of my conversion therapy experience, honestly. Have it taking that perspective, like zooming out, because what I've come to similarly to what you're saying is, my soul really, this incarnation wanted to learn love, like really love, like mastery of love. And so, of course, part of my journey needed to be bumping into that which is not love, right?
Mm,
And including that which is disguised as love, or
mm,
but isn't quite, right? Like, so saying I love you but I need you to change,
mhm,
my body needed to feel that and feel like, nope, that's still not quite love, that's still not quite it. And
mm,
so I can, when I zoom out to that level, I can look kind of as the co-creator of my life and say, like, okay, that was a lesson, that was a healing I needed to heal that particular love wound so that I can have a more complete and whole embodied experience of love on a more massive level.
beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that conversion therapy is the invalidation of love. It's saying that your love is not valid. And so,
Yes.
yeah, it's a perfect challenge to push up against for someone whose part of their purpose is to be an expression and celebration and strong advocate for love on this planet. Yeah,
Yes.
what comes up as you share that is this idea that, you know, it's possible that you might have not been able to surpass it. You might have ended up allowing the conversion to happen. And in so doing, that wound, that part of your soul's purpose is here to heal, would have perhaps gotten worse, right? And in the same way that our wounds get worse and worse until we finally can't ignore them anymore and we have to deal with them, perhaps that would have been part of the journey towards waking you up to actually addressing it. So that even in these instances where we don't choose to heal, that they're still in the direction of our soul's evolution, because they're creating an even more obvious wound for perhaps our next life, or whatever the cosmology that you believe in, but for the next part of our soul's existence to then find the opportunity to heal.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it makes me think, actually, if when I break down my conversion therapy experience, the
Mm,
most harmful part of it was the moment that I abandoned myself.
mm,
Because in the trajectory of it, if I tell a little bit more of that story, my family really wanted me to go have this intervention.
mm,
They thought it was the best thing for me, and I went along with it, not wanting to upset anyone. And I ended up having a moment of just saying, you know what, this matters so much to everybody else. Everybody's so upset. They seem so distraught by this. I'm just going to please them. I'm going to do what everybody else wants. I want to stay safe. I want to stay included and belonging in this tribe. So I'm going to do what they want. And there was a moment where I basically said, okay, I'll be straight.
mhm,
And it was that moment where that was the moment I abandoned me, truly. Before that, it was still me, kind of dealing with the world. But now it was like, no, I'm going to go with them. I'm going to abandon myself and go with them. And
mhm,
that was truly what I've had to reckon with, more than even what was kind of put on me from the outside. And
mhm,
just so nobody's left hanging on that part of the story, I went to college attempting to, quote, be straight. And thankfully, I went to college in Austin, Texas, whereas I had grown up in Dallas, Texas. And it was a much more accepting environment, and I was able to find some peace between what I thought was two completely at odds things, spirituality or religion and sexuality or gender identity, whatever, queerness. I was able to see that those two absolutely can coexist. And that began my healing journey. So I was able to come back to who I was, thankfully. But there was that moment there. There was about a little less than a year long, maybe a 6-month period of time where I was really, it had, quote, worked on me for a minute.
Yes. And would you mind just sharing that bit of the story when you did have the realization that those two worlds could be together?
Yeah, I was walking down 6th Street, or sorry, the Drag is called in Austin, Texas. It's Guadalupe Avenue. It's like right near campus. Anyways, there's a lot of churches, campus churches on that drag. And as I was walking down the street, I saw the same denomination of church I grew up in, which was a Lutheran church, and it had a gay flag hanging from the outside.
Mhm.
And in that moment, like all of my cognitive dissonance was just pinging, going off.
Mm.
And I had to go in and talk to the pastor and say, like, what's going on here? Because I just went through a very invasive process telling me that, trying to basically tell me that's not okay and I should change so that I could be what God wants me to be. And you're now telling me that queers are welcome in God's, place.
Mhm.
And his answer, and I say this in the book, it's not like he said, oh, God loves gay people, big hug. He wasn't even that evolved to say that. All he said was, well, we don't really know. And so we'd rather err on the side of if more people getting to meet God. Which,
Yeah.
I guess I can respect that. For me, it was enough. For me, it was very important to hear that, because what I heard was where I had given away my spiritual authority in
Mhm.
conversion therapy. I gave it away and said, my parents must know better. My church must know better. The facilitators of this conversion therapy experience must know better. They're the authority. I am not. When
Mhm.
I heard this pastor say, well, we actually don't know, it turned something on in my mind of like, of course nobody else knows. Like we're all God beings trying to figure out our human experience here. And I'm just as sovereign and have just as much spiritual authority, especially as it comes to my identity in my life and who I'm here to be, as anybody, more so.
Yes.
And so that really was that moment that in a way, without even probably knowing it, he gave me my spiritual power back to say,
Mm.
I trust me, and I trust I trust the relationship in myself that I have with God, the creator, energy, source, force, whatever. I trust that enough to listen to it.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that rainbow flag flying in front of the church, open that door for you. And I've shared this on other podcasts, but I always like to talk about praying to the altar of maybe, and to just recognize that, yeah, we don't know. And for me, I like to refer to God as great mystery. I borrow that from Native American uh, religious and spiritual practices to refer to God as great mystery, which is to acknowledge that it is a mystery, that there is not a certainty in this world of spirituality, and that within that mystery is the invitation for me to connect with what feels aligned, what feels true, what feels present in this moment, knowing that it's ever evolving as well. What might feel true to me now might feel differently, in 6 months from now or an hour from now. And to just be with spirit in this ever flowing way, knowing that it's not a clear path, knowing that it's not a prescribed set of rules and directions, that we are just here to create a relationship, as are all relationships, right? Like we never really know how relationships work. We are in them and we are moving with them as they evolve. The same as relationship with God. Like it is a ever moving, evolving relationship. And so to say that it has to be a certain way and be subscribed to certain beliefs and rules and dogmas is very counterintuitive to the way that I like to be in relationship with spirit.
I love that. And what I love about great mystery is it reminds us that we are part of that mystery. Because I think so one of the harmful things that can happen is when we kind of put this quote God out there and forget the fact that we're actually a part of it. And when we recognize we're a part of it, we do get to listen to, like, everything that's happening inside of us is valid because it's part of that it's part of that great mystery. So it can be honored and can be validated rather than invalidated, which was my personal experience. So I love that. I also do struggle with God, the word God sometimes. And I think it's because language, we've done our best with language, but language is so limiting. It immediately creates a smallness around something that is so much bigger than a word can define. And so like every time the word even comes out of my mouth, I have a little cringe just because it always feels like that's not quite right.
Yeah, God for me often feels very patriarchal. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a masculine energy associated with it for me. And so I often say God, goddess, or goddess, God, because I like to have both that masculine and feminine energy present. Yeah, so similarly, yeah, it's God, I think, I'd say because of the way God has been used or abused or manipulated by organized religion, can sometimes carry that energy. Yeah, that word. Cool. Well, let's jump into rainbow. Again, I love that the rainbow is such a big part of your story, and then becomes the acronym for the path that you describe to your readers. So the rainbow, which I'll just quickly say the cliff notes for that, but readers can get the book and get it deeper into any of these sections. But the R is for reality check your story. The A is for assess your relationship readiness. The I is to integrate your past. The N is to nurture your North Star. The B is to build your inner compass. The O is to open your heart to love. And the W is to work your material. So that just gives you listeners a sneak peek at what the acronym stands for. And we're going to actually cover a couple of them. It feels like we were going into the nurture your North Star already. I don't know if you have more to say on that, but that seemed like what was coming up just now.
Yeah, so it's really important for me. Like the beginning, the RAI, it's really all about acknowledging that there's something going on, like we talked about already, like asking
Yep.
that question of how is this affecting me, right? And then
Yep.
what can you do to bring yourself back into wholeness and integration? But when
Yep.
we get to this I feel that a lot of the harm that's been done in what I consider spiritual wounding, right? Like any kinds of identity wounds that come from a spiritual lens. Like in my case, being told that on a spiritual level, I'm not okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when we've experienced something like that, it's really important to come back to an authentic experience of spirituality or connectedness to the your higher self.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's so important is because I personally felt like when I said, okay, religion doesn't want me, I basically said, well, I don't want them either. And anything that has to do with that, I don't want to have in my life. And very quickly, I realized going through life without any set of spiritual support or practices or ways to remind myself of the truth of who I am, of this amazing being that I am,
Mm.
I was really going through life with what I consider like, a hand tied behind my back of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I came back to spirituality in a way that was authentic to me, like not imposed by somebody else, but felt and called from myself, that I really felt whole again. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what the N is about. It's like you can't be whole if there's a part of you that is rejecting things because they've rejected you. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean we have to take them as they were given to us, but it means, can we find a way to integrate and make peace with this part of ourselves, the spiritual part of ourselves, in a way that totally supports and celebrates and honors exactly who we are and really does offer the best possible support to our lives.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that story is true for many queer folks who've been damaged by organized religion and felt rejected by it. And then they then turn to reject their connection to spirit. And,
Yes.
and it also, what comes up for me is this rejection of who we are in our sexuality often gets in place of that a sort of rebellious streak for many gay men of
Yeah.
sexual promiscuity, right? It's like, well, no, I'm not straight, and if you're gonna tell me that I'm not supposed to be with men, I'm gonna be with a ton of men, right? And so it's like this pushback that we go from rejection to an unhealthy response to that rejection. And then for a lot of gay men or queer folks in general, find our way back to health and balance. But it isn't without that first step of like rebelliousness, which unfortunately I think in the world of spirituality, a lot of queer folks don't move past it, and they remain, staunch atheists who, really have resentment towards religion and are then associating religion with spirituality.
And the thesis there is my belief is that we're still not totally free when we're making choices that are in reaction to something,
Yes.
rather than truly being able to touch into my truth and honor whatever that is.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So great. So nurture, your North Star, is the N. What other letters would you like to give a little energy to?
So of all the letters of the rainbow, I mean, I think it's like your children not supposed to pick a favorite, but I like, my favorite of it is the B. I love the B. It stands for build your inner compass. And the reason this one is so important to me, again, comes from my own personal experience. One of the things I was told or programmed with in conversion therapy was, you can't trust yourself. You can't listen to your emotions, because in my case, it was because Satan has a hold on you and is manipulating you and using your own emotions against you. And so for me, I went through life not trusting myself, believing that I couldn't listen to me because I was corrupted. I wasn't a good sense of true north. I wasn't a good source of direction. And even though I unprogrammed myself about conversion therapy, that inner compass piece, it stayed with me. Like, I still always second guessed myself, and I would make bad decisions, or I would not follow my intuition about a relationship. I would override my intuition, and I would say like, oh no, I can make this work, right? Like, I'm strong enough to make this work. And so the B is so near and dear to my heart, because if we as queer people, or any people, can reestablish our own inner compass, that is our strongest source of guidance in the world. And the inner compass is really, it's using all of you, not just your brain and what you've been conditioned with, but it's connecting brain with heart, with intuition, with soul, with all of it, and bringing that whole compass back online, and then truly spending enough time with it that you learn how to listen and then how to trust.
Yes. Ooh, so good. And so what are some practical ways folks can build their inner compass? What are some ways that we can get in touch with our truth, our intuition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like the thing that keeps us from it the most
Mm,
is the external noises, the external programs. I mean, just all you have to do is look around. Everybody wants to tell you how to be, or
mm,
what to think, or what to buy, or how to feel. We have so many external stimuli programming us all the time. And so one of the things that helped me a lot was finding silence, finding stillness. I spent a lot of my healing journey going on little silent retreats here and there. Nothing fancy. I mean, very simple, very kind of like rustic. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but just finding a way to tune out. And I don't know how you feel about this, Will, but I feel like a lot of queer people tend to be in touch with their sensitivity. I think we're all sensitive. All beings are sensitive, but I think queer people have tended to become more in touch with our sensitivity,
yeah.
which is fabulous. It's a superpower, but it also means that we're even more sensitive to all the external everything, right? We feel it all, we
More
sense it
easily
all.
influenced. Yeah.
Totally. And so that makes that need to kind of step away from the energies of everything else and everyone else, and be with yourself, even more important, I think, for us as we're trying to listen again. And it takes kind of some deep listening, asking questions within, and then just being quiet and listening to yourself. And it might be subtle at first. I remember the first time I listened to my heart instead of my brain, it was like my heart was whispering and my brain was like shouting with a drum set behind it. And so like learning the nuances of how the more subtle truths of yourself speak to you. And it takes a little time to calibrate to that, just like any new noise or new communication does.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And it speaks to, going back to relationships, right? How do you create a different relationship with your heart intelligence or your body intelligence, so that you're not just in communication with your brain, that you're actually relating with these other parts of yourselves that have so much to offer, so much
Absolutely.
wisdom. Great. Anything else in the rainbow before we jump on to Dear Queer People, which I'm super excited.
I'll just say one thing about kind of the heart and relationships. What I learned through this process was that when I was not authentically me, and what I mean by that is not even the queer thing. Like, I'd come through conversion therapy, I was out as a queer person, but I was still programmed by these old messages that were telling me I was not worthy and not good enough, all of that stuff. And so in some ways I wasn't fully aligned with myself. What that was doing was it was basically putting out a signal. Like, imagine that we're all putting out these signals of who we are. It's like a beacon, right? Like, we're attracting to us based on what we're putting out, we're attracting back. And what I learned about myself was if I wasn't willing to open my heart all the way and truly let my full heart radiate out, I could never attract back to me a match, because I was only like, I had a part of me out there. So I was getting like a part match, right? Like partially match. So if that's resonating with anybody about like, why do I like keep kind of getting close with relationships, but not all the way there? I would say it might be that there's still parts of you that you're not being willing to fully open your heart and shine out there and radiate and just be courageously and unapologetically you. Because what that leads to is getting back that like, you know, what energy matches you, a person, a group of people, whoever it is that you're trying to draw to be in your circle.
That's so interesting, and such a useful, practical assessment tool to play with, right? To notice, like, who am I attracting, and in that, discovering, like, what is that saying about my vibration? Like, what energy am I putting out there that's creating the vibration that's pulling in that energy? And what's missing? Like, what energy is not being put out there to attract what I want? And so, yeah, even regardless of if the mission is to find your perfect soul partner, it just seems like a really great modality or yeah, model for assessing where we're at in terms of expressing all of who we are.
Yeah. And with compassion, of course, and non-judgment, because it can be really tempting to want to say like, oh, I'm doing something wrong because I'm attracting wrong people. It's not that at all. It's just the more true you can be, the more true you can draw in. And there's nothing wrong with any way you're doing it now. It's just, it's an invitation to see, is there more truth and more alignment that's possible?
Love it. So yeah, speaking of, our vibration as a call, a energy call, what I love about Dear Queer People is this idea of it as like a bat signal. So help us see and feel that bat signal. Tell us about the Dear Queer People initiative.
Yeah. So at the very end of my book, this message kind of came through as I was writing, and it was this message of, it was like a turning the tables kind of a message. It wasn't, it was basically like, stop looking at yourself and other queer people as this marginalized population, because who you really are is you all have had experiences that will allow you to be the guides for the future of humanity. It was like it was huge. When I heard it the first time, when it came through, I was like, holy cow, I've never seen it that way. It's almost like we are now in this position as queer people that we can show others and even others that used to persecute us in some ways, what it's like to be able to listen within to who you really are and not be trapped by the systems and structures telling you who you are, and therefore you're stuck in who you have to be to please these systems. It's a nuance, but I hope the queer people listening understand what I'm saying. Like, we've been through this journey. And so there's a leadership potential here for us. There's a mentorship or a guidance-ship potential for us. And my Dear Queer People love letter is kind of a call to our community to say, like, any of these old stories we have that we're not good enough, or whatever society has tried to tell us or put us in this box that we're other, we actually have the ability now to step up and say, we're needed. We are the transformers. We're the lovers who can help this world evolve to its next phase, because humanity is waking up and all of these systems are crumbling. And as they're starting to do that, people are afraid of like what's coming. And our community has been through that fear of like, who am I going to be if I get rejected? Like, we know we made it. We know who we are. And
Mhm.
so we really get to now say, like, we can help others who are terrified of being rejected by the systems around them as they're crumbling. So all of
Mm.
that to say, I put this love letter out to the world, and I'm now just gathering people who align with this vision and who want to be a part of kind of moving our community into a state of who we are, like radiance, a state of, we have something to offer the world, and we can just radiate who we are and be leaders in that way in this moment in time. And so it's a call to who wants to be a part of that. And that's what the new initiative is about.
Oh, so good. Yeah, what I'm present to is this awareness of the systems crumbling, and within those systems crumbling, the rule books being burned. It's like
Yes.
no longer are subscribing to these rule books and to these predetermined paths.
Yes.
And that's been the truth for queer folks, that as soon as we discover this truth about ourselves that is outside of the heteronormative norm, we lose the opportunity to just follow the old path and listen to the old rules. Like suddenly we're on our own path, and it's up to us to navigate that. And so we have practiced nurturing our North Star, like figuring it
Yes.
out for ourselves. And so what a beautiful invitation to queer folks to take the experience and utilize it as a strength to support folks as we are stepping into this new paradigm. And it's an exciting paradigm. It's a paradigm that is ripe with more truth, more
Yes.
freedom, more
Yes.
authenticity. And these are things that we, as awakened queer people, have been blessed with. And now we have this opportunity to welcome non-queer people into that experience.
Yes. It's almost the ultimate antidote to identity harm. That's kind of how I see it. It's like, if we can truly embrace this identity of us as healed and whole and able to shine who we are and help others, like if that's how we see ourselves, imagine how we would live our lives if that's how we saw ourselves. We would, like physically, we would really want to nurture ourselves, and mentally and emotionally, we would be taking care of ourselves, and spiritually, we would be nourishing ourselves. So I'm imagining this being a realignment for the queer community to remember who we really are and how amazing we really are, and to treat ourselves that way. And therefore, like you said, be able to then welcome in others to say, that's, you're amazing. You also are this identity of this whole complete radiant being. So let's do this.
Yeah, and it's my truth that if we as a human population could all step into that, could all
Yes.
step into our truth and our highest purpose, that we would live in such harmony and peace and be in this incredibly ideal state. And
Yeah.
that we as queer people can be on the forefront of that movement.
And fear only gets to get in there when we aren't in that place of that truth of our identity. Once
Yeah.
we're in that truth of our identity, there isn't space for fear, because we know who we are. And that fear is, I think, what opens the door for all the chaos, right? Like it's that fear that lets in the chaos as we're seeking for solutions, like, oh, that's going to help me, or that's going to help me, or I need this to be protected, or I need that to be protected. All of that gets to fall away, and we do get to step into the highest version of ourselves as humanity without that fear, and just in our truth of knowing who we are. And therefore who we are is love, so it creates this world of complete love.
Yes, yes to that vision. I love that so much. Yeah, thank you. So beautiful. I can't really think of a better way to end this episode, but is there any final thoughts that you want to share with the listeners as we wrap things up?
Just love yourself. It's amazing. If you struggle with loving yourself, we've all been there. And I learned a trick recently that has helped me a lot. And it is thinking of a time when you have actually done something that was hard, like you've actually done it. And going back to that time and feeling the emotions of that. Like maybe for me, it was, I decided I was going to be vegan. And it was a decision I made in a moment. And once I made that decision, my identity now said, this is who I am. And I was able to then align to that identity. So now when I need to do something hard, I think back to that and I think about that change I was actually able to make and harness that energy that I made then to know it's possible. And port that and like lean into that knowing of I've done this before, I can totally do this again. So if that's helpful to anyone, it's been something I've been leaning on something you've already done, harnessing the energy from it and letting it propel you through whatever you're doing now, whatever the current challenges in your life.
Yes, that real healing, that real transformation is possible. And this book, Gay the Pray Away, is a great access point to that real healing and transformation. And I imagine Dear Queer People similarly will be a powerful invitation for us queer folks to step into that. So thank you for all you're doing on this planet. I really appreciate and love you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for making these beautiful spaces, Will, and everything you're doing as well.
My pleasure and honor.